A struggling college student working 3 jobs to afford textbooks asks a kind nurse at the campus health clinic to be his date to the senior dance, never knowing that the woman in scrubs who had treated his exhaustion with gentle compassion was Katherine Morgan, daughter of tech billionaire Richard Morgan, who had spent 5 years hiding from her privileged world in pursuit of something real. His simple invitation, delivered with trembling hands and a worn suit jacket draped over his arm, would unravel the carefully constructed ordinary life she had built, to force her to choose between the authenticity she craved and the family she had abandoned, and ultimately teach them both that true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the courage to be vulnerable. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the studio apartment on Maple Street, casting gentle shadows across furniture that told stories of other lives. A secondhand sofa with faded floral patterns, a wooden table scarred with cup rings, a lamp that flickered if you touched it wrong. Katherine Morgan, who went by Kate now, just Kate, stirred her instant coffee and watched the steam rise like the past she had worked so hard to leave behind. Her nursing scrubs, pale blue and practical, hung on the back of the bathroom door, freshly washed in the building's coin laundry, and she ran her fingers over the fabric with something close to reverence, because these clothes represented everything her former life was not. Honest work, genuine purpose, invisibility. She had chosen this small apartment deliberately. The kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and landlords asked no questions beyond whether the rent would be paid on time, and for 5 years it had been her sanctuary, her hiding place, her salvation. The university health clinic opened at 8, and Kate was always the first to arrive, unlocking the door with keys that felt more precious than any jewelry she had once worn, because these keys meant she belonged somewhere through her own merit, not her last name. The waiting room would soon fill with students, young people carrying backpacks heavy with textbooks and futures, and she would greet each one with the same gentle attention, checking temperatures with careful hands, listening to anxious hearts, bandaging scraped knees, and wounded pride with equal care. There was a peace in the routine that she had never known in her previous life, a quietness that settled into her bones each time a grateful student said, "Thank you," and meant it. She did not think about the penthouse apartment she had abandoned, the closets full of designer clothes gathering dust, the father who had stopped calling after the first year of silence. She did not think about the society pages that probably still wondered where Richard Morgan's daughter had disappeared to, or the trust fund sitting untouched in an account she pretended did not exist. Here, in this small apartment with its second-hand dreams and modest paycheck, Kate had found something her family's wealth could never buy: the freedom to be no one special, to be just another nurse in scrubs, helping just another student through just another day. And in that beautiful anonymity, she had finally learned to breathe. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Daniel Carter's alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, the same way it had every morning for 3 years, and he silenced it with the practiced motion of someone who had long ago stopped dreaming of sleeping in. His textbooks sat stacked on the floor beside his mattress, their spines cracked and pages dog-eared. Most of them bought used from the campus bookstore's discount bin, some of them borrowed and photocopied page by precious page, because even used was sometimes too expensive. The backpack hanging on his door told its own story. Patched with duct tape where the seams had split, its zippers held together with safety pins, and he grabbed it with the same care someone else might handle a briefcase, because this bag carried everything that mattered, and his future, in the form of lecture notes and assignment sheets, and the slim hope that education could break the cycle of poverty that had claimed his mother's entire life. She had worked 2 jobs to keep him in school, cleaning houses during the day and offices at night. And he could still see her hands, red and raw from chemicals, holding his report cards like they were treasure maps leading somewhere better. She had died 6 months before his high school graduation. A stroke at 52, her body simply giving out from exhaustion. And Daniel had made a promise at her graveside that he would finish, that he would make something of himself. that her sacrifices would mean something. Now he was 3 months from graduation, a senior at the state university, working the breakfast shift at the campus cafeteria, the afternoon shift at the library, and weekend nights at a gas station off the highway. Sleeping 4 hours if he was lucky, surviving on coffee and stubborn pride. His grades were immaculate because failure was not an option. Because every B felt like a betrayal of everything his mother had given up. And his professors noticed him, the student who sat front row despite the exhaustion carved into his face, who asked questions that proved he had done not just the required reading, but the supplemental materials too. The senior dance was 2 weeks away, and flyers plastered every bulletin board on campus, photos of last year's event showing students in formal wear dancing under twinkling lights, and Daniel had walked past those flyers every day, pretending they did not exist. Because the $40 ticket might as well have been $4,000, because he owned one suit that his mother had bought him for her funeral. And the thought of wearing it to dance felt wrong in ways he could not explain. But sometimes, late at night when exhaustion made him honest, he allowed himself to imagine it, just for a moment, what it might feel like to be a normal student and to have one night that was not about survival, to share one perfect evening with someone who saw him as more than just the kid who could not afford to be young. Daniel felt the world tilt sideways in the middle of his economics lecture, his vision blurring at the edges like an old photograph left too long in the sun. And the next thing he knew, he was staring up at fluorescent lights in the campus health clinic, with a nurse's face hovering above his own, her eyes filled with a concern that seemed to reach past his symptoms and touch something deeper. Kate had seen students faint before, usually from hangovers or skipped meals. But something about the young man on her examination table made her hands move with extra care as she checked his pulse, his heart racing like a frightened bird, his skin pale and clammy despite the warmth of the room. "When did you last sleep?" she asked. And Daniel tried to sit up, embarrassed, insisting he was fine. But she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and the weight of that simple touch, so careful, so human, made him sink back down. The truth came out slowly, reluctantly, pulled from him by her quiet patience. The 3 jobs, the 4 hours of sleep, the meals he skipped to buy textbooks, and Kate listened without judgment, without pity. Her face reflecting understanding rather than sympathy. "You are working yourself to death," she said softly, and there was something in her voice that suggested she knew about working hard, about the cost of ambition, about choosing difficult paths. Daniel looked at her then, really looked, and saw past the nurse's scrubs to the person underneath, someone who moved through the clinic like she belonged there, but carried herself with a grace that seemed at odds with the institutional walls and cheap linoleum floors. "My mother used to say that hard work is the only inheritance that matters," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion, and Kate felt something crack open inside her chest because she understood that sentiment in ways she could never explain, understood the weight of expectations and the dignity found in earning rather than inheriting. She brought him water, made him drink slowly, and wrote him an excuse from classes for the rest of the day, her handwriting neat and careful on the clinic's letterhead. "You have to take care of yourself," she said, "because whatever you are working toward will not matter if you do not survive to see it." Daniel took the note with trembling hands and looked at her with gratitude that went beyond relief. A recognition that passed between them like a secret, and he thanked her in a voice that made Kate remember why she had become a nurse in the first place. To help people, to be useful, to matter in small and genuine ways. Daniel returned to the clinic 3 days later for the follow-up appointment Kate had insisted upon. And then again the following week, and the week after that, and somewhere between checking his blood pressure and asking about his sleep schedule, their conversations began to drift beyond medical necessity into something that felt like friendship, or perhaps the beginning of something neither of them had names for yet. Kate learned that he was studying business administration because his mother had always said education was the ladder out of poverty, that he dreamed of starting a nonprofit to help first-generation college students navigate the system that seemed designed to keep people like him out, that he kept his mother's photograph in his wallet and sometimes talked to it when the exhaustion became too heavy to carry alone. Daniel learned that Kate had been a nurse for 5 years, that she loved old novels from the library's free shelf, that she took her coffee black because she had learned to appreciate things in their simplest form, and though she never spoke about her past, he sensed a loneliness in her that matched his own. A feeling of being separate from the world even while moving through it. She started timing her breaks to coincide with his appointments, and they would sit in the small staff room with its ancient coffee maker and talk about books, about the difference between loneliness and solitude, about the strange courage it took to keep moving forward when the world seemed determined to push you back. Daniel noticed things about her that no one else seemed to see. The way her smile sometimes did not quite reach her eyes, the careful distance she maintained from other staff members, the quality of her watch that seemed at odds with her thrift store clothes. And he wondered what she was hiding but never asked, because he understood that everyone had reasons for their secrets. Kate found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that felt dangerous and thrilling, and this young man with his worn backpack and fierce determination, who treated her like she mattered not because of what she could do for him, but because of who she was in those quiet moments between heartbeats. They talked about dignity, about the difference between pride and arrogance, about how the hardest battles were often the ones fought in silence, and in those conversations Kate felt more seen than she had in all the years of her privileged childhood, surrounded by people who looked at her and saw only her father's daughter. One afternoon, as autumn light slanted through the clinic windows, Daniel brought her a paperback novel he had found at a yard sale. Its pages yellowed but its story intact, and said he thought she might like it, and Kate held that book like it was something precious because it was a gift given freely, with no expectation of return, and she realized with a start that she was falling for this struggling student who saw past her carefully constructed ordinary life to the person she desperately wanted to be. Daniel had been saving for 3 weeks, skipping lunches and walking instead of taking the campus shuttle, collecting spare change in a jar beside his mattress that clinked with the sound of small sacrifices and growing hope, and when he finally had enough, he went to the florist near the university gates and bought the simplest corsage they had. White roses with a satin ribbon, modest but sincere. He carried it in a small plastic box that felt impossibly heavy as he walked to the health clinic near closing time, his heart hammering against his ribs with a rhythm that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the terrifying vulnerability of wanting something he had no right to expect. Kate was alone in the clinic, filing paperwork at the front desk, and she looked up when the door chimed, her smile automatic until she saw his face and realized something was different, something was about to change. Daniel stood in the doorway with his hands shaking, and the corsage box clutched against his chest like a shield. And for a long moment he could not speak, could not push the words past the fear that she would say no, that he had misread the connection between them, that a woman like her would never want to spend an evening with someone like him. "Kate," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. And she came around the desk because she could see he was struggling, could see the courage it was taking for him to simply stand there. "I know this is probably inappropriate," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "And I know I am just a patient and you are a nurse, and maybe I am completely wrong about this. But there is a senior dance in 2 weeks, and I would be honored, truly honored, if you would go with me." He opened the corsage box with trembling fingers, showing her the simple white roses. "I cannot afford anything fancy," he admitted, his honesty raw and unguarded. "I cannot take you to an expensive restaurant or rent a limousine or give you the kind of evening you probably deserve, but I can promise you sincerity, and I can promise you that if you say yes, it would mean more to me than I know how to express." Kate felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes because she had been pursued before by men with platinum cards and vacation homes, by men who saw her as a trophy or a transaction, but no one had ever stood before her with such naked vulnerability, such genuine hope, offering not what he had but what he was. She looked at the corsage, at his trembling hands, at his face that showed every emotion he was feeling, and she saw not poverty but richness, not limitation but abundance, and she realized that this struggling student with his worn suit and borrowed courage was offering her something no amount of money could buy, the chance to be chosen for herself, to be wanted not despite her ordinariness, but because of it. Kate sat alone in her studio apartment that night, with the corsage box resting on her secondhand coffee table, the white roses catching the lamplight like small promises, and she felt the careful walls she had built around her new life beginning to crack under the weight of wanting something real. She had said yes to Daniel at the clinic, the word escaping before her careful mind could stop it. But now, in the silence of her chosen solitude, the implications settled over her like a heavy coat, because going to a public dance meant photographs, meant visibility, meant the possibility that someone might recognize Richard Morgan's disappeared daughter beneath the simple nursing scrubs and thrift store existence. The memories came unbidden, flooding through the cracks in her defenses. Champagne toasts at galas where she smiled until her face ached. Charity auctions where people bid on her company like she was a prize, her father's expectations crushing her beneath their weight like stones piled on her chest until she could not breathe. She had left that world 5 years ago on a Tuesday morning, walking out of the penthouse with nothing but a hastily packed suitcase and a desperate need to find out who Katherine Morgan was when stripped of wealth and status and the suffocating assumption that money solved everything. She had chosen nursing because it was honest work, had chosen this anonymous college town because no one looked twice at another healthcare worker in scrubs, had chosen solitude because it was safer than risking her carefully constructed ordinary life. But Daniel had seen her, really seen her, and in his presence she felt more authentically herself than she ever had at any society function or family obligation. The fear was real and valid. She could admit that. The terror that accepting his invitation would unravel everything, that somehow her past would catch up with her at a college dance in a decorated gymnasium, that she would lose this precious anonymity she had fought so hard to claim. Yet the alternative felt worse somehow. Saying no to the first genuine connection she had felt in years, rejecting the vulnerability Daniel had offered with his trembling hands and honest admission. Choosing fear over the possibility of something true, Kate picked up the corsage box and opened it, touching the white roses with careful fingers, and she made her decision in that moment, a choice that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She would go to the dance with Daniel Carter, would wear a thrift store dress and dance in a gymnasium, would risk everything for one evening of authentic human connection, because 5 years of hiding had taught her that safety without meaning was just another kind of prison, and she was done living behind walls. Daniel picked up every extra shift the cafeteria manager would give him, working through his study breaks and sacrificing sleep he could not afford to lose, watching the bills accumulate in his jar with a sense of purpose that made the exhaustion feel almost bearable. He found a rental shop 3 blocks off campus that offered student discounts, and the suit he chose was simple black, with a white shirt, nothing fancy, but when he tried it on and saw himself in the mirror, he looked like someone who belonged at a dance, someone who could stand beside Kate without shame. His roommates noticed the change in him, the way he hummed while studying, the careful way he counted his money each night, and when he finally told them about Kate, they saw something in his face they had never seen before. Hope mixed with terror, vulnerability wrapped in determination. They helped him research affordable restaurants, found a small Italian place that offered student specials, taught him how to tie his tie properly because his mother had never had occasion to show him, and their teasing was gentle because they recognized that this mattered to him in ways that went beyond a simple date. Kate spent her Saturday morning walking through every thrift store in a 5-mile radius, searching through racks of donated dresses with the focused intensity of someone on a mission. And she found it in the third shop, a dress the color of deep sapphire that hung simply on its hanger but transformed when she tried it on. Elegant without being expensive, beautiful without screaming wealth. She stood in the tiny dressing room, examining her reflection from every angle, making sure nothing about the dress would betray her background, no designer labels or telltale stitching or fabric too fine for a nurse's modest salary. She bought it for $15 and felt victorious, like she had won a battle against her own past. That week crawled by with agonizing slowness for both of them. Daniel checking and rechecking his plans. Kate trying on the dress 3 more times in her apartment to convince herself she had chosen correctly, both of them lying awake at night, running through scenarios and possibilities and fears. Daniel worried that he would not know how to dance properly, that his borrowed courtesy would not be enough, that Kate would realize halfway through the evening that she had made a mistake saying yes. Kate worried that someone would recognize her, that a photograph would surface, that her father's security team, still searching for her, would somehow track her to this small college town and destroy the beautiful, ordinary life she had built. But beneath the worry ran a current of excitement neither could deny. The electric anticipation of two people who had found something unexpected in each other and were brave enough, or foolish enough, to see where it might lead. Daniel knocked on Kate's apartment door at 6 o'clock exactly, the corsage box in one hand and his heart in his throat. And when she opened the door wearing that sapphire dress with her hair swept back in a simple style, he forgot every rehearsed greeting because she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive jewelry or professional styling, and everything to do with the genuine smile that lit her face when she saw him. "You look wonderful," he managed to say. And she looked at him in his rented suit, at the care he had taken with his appearance, at the corsage he offered with trembling hands, and she felt something shift inside her chest because no one had ever looked at her the way Daniel was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she was worth every sacrifice. They walked to the Italian restaurant he had chosen, a small family-owned place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, and over plates of pasta that cost less than the appetizers at the restaurants her father frequented. They talked with the ease of old friends and the electricity of new possibilities. Daniel told her about his mother's dreams for him, about the non-profit he wanted to build, about his fear that he would somehow fail to honor her memory. And Kate listened with her whole attention, asking questions that showed she understood not just his words, but the heart behind them. She told him about choosing nursing, about finding purpose in service, about learning that the most valuable things in life could not be purchased. And though she carefully avoided the details of her past, the truth in her words was undeniable. When they arrived at the gymnasium, transformed with twinkling lights and silver streamers into something almost magical, Daniel felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with the woman beside him. The fact that she had chosen to be here with him, that she saw value in an evening that cost less than most students spent on textbooks. Other students milled around in their formal wear, some arriving in expensive cars with professional photographers. But Daniel walked in with Kate on his arm and felt richer than all of them combined. Kate felt the gymnasium lights wash over her like a baptism, felt the music pulse through her chest, felt Daniel's hand warm and slightly nervous in hers, and she realized with startling clarity that she felt more alive in this decorated gymnasium with this struggling student than she ever had at any gala or society function. Because this was real, this was chosen, this was hers. The first dance was slow and sweet, and Daniel held Kate like she was something fragile and precious, one hand at her waist and the other clasping hers with a gentleness that made her throat tighten with emotion, and they moved together across the gymnasium floor with the uncertain grace of two people learning a new language in real time. She rested her head against his shoulder and felt his heart beating through the rented fabric of his suit. Steady and strong, and for the first time in 5 years, she stopped thinking about who she had been or who she was pretending to be, and simply existed in the present moment as Kate, just Kate, dancing with a man who saw her. Between songs they found a corner table and talked with the easy intimacy of people who had been storing up words for each other, laughing at shared observations about the elaborate decorations and the DJ's enthusiastic attempts to get everyone on the dance floor. And their laughter had the quality of relief, like they were both surprised and grateful that the evening was everything they had hoped it would be. Other students began to notice them. The way Daniel looked at Kate like she had hung the moon and stars specifically for him. The way Kate smiled with her whole face instead of the polite half-smile she wore at the clinic, and whispers rippled through the crowd about the quiet guy who worked 3 jobs and the nurse he had somehow convinced to be his date. Daniel's roommates watched from across the gymnasium and saw something in their friend's expression that made them nudge each other and grin, a happiness so pure and unguarded it was almost painful to witness, and they knew without being told that this was more than just a dance, more than just a date. This was Daniel falling headlong into something that would change him. Kate felt the walls she had built around herself crumbling with each song, each shared glance, each moment of Daniel's hand warm in hers, and instead of fighting it, she let herself fall, let herself be vulnerable, let herself want something without calculating the cost or measuring the risk. They danced fast songs with clumsy enthusiasm and slow songs with increasing confidence. And somewhere between the third and fourth dance, Kate realized she had stopped monitoring the room for familiar faces, stopped worrying about photographers, stopped being afraid. Because the present moment with Daniel was worth whatever consequences might come. This was what she had been searching for when she left her father's world. This feeling of being fully alive, fully present, fully herself, and she held on to it with both hands like a drowning woman holds on to a lifeline, knowing it might not last but grateful beyond words that it existed at all. The photographer appeared near the end of the evening, a student from the campus journalism program hired to capture memories for the yearbook and the memory wall that would hang in the student center, and she moved through the crowd with her camera raised, hunting for moments worth preserving. Kate and Daniel were dancing to a slow song, lost in their own world, when the flash went off, and they looked up simultaneously, startled, caught in a moment of such genuine connection that the photographer smiled behind her camera and knew she had captured something special. Daniel's hand was spread across Kate's back, protective and tender, and her head was tilted toward his with a smile that transformed her entire face, unguarded and radiant, the kind of smile that came from deep happiness rather than social obligation. The photographer showed them the screen on her camera, and the image made Kate's breath catch because she looked happy, truly happy, and Daniel looked at her in the photograph like she was his entire universe compressed into one person in a sapphire dress. "That is beautiful," Daniel said quietly, and the photographer promised it would be printed for the memory wall within a week, available for purchase if they wanted copies. "I will get you one," Daniel told Kate, his voice full of a promise that extended beyond a simple photograph. "I want you to remember this. Remember tonight. Remember us like this." Kate nodded, unable to speak past the emotion welling in her throat, because she wanted to remember too, wanted to preserve this perfect evening before reality intruded and complicated everything. They returned to dancing, but something had shifted, the photograph making permanent what had felt ephemeral, capturing proof that this connection between them was real and visible and undeniable. Daniel's thumb traced small circles on her back through the fabric of her dress, an unconscious gesture of intimacy that made her feel cherished in ways she had never experienced. And she leaned into him, allowing herself the luxury of being held, being wanted, being seen. The evening was winding down, other couples beginning to drift toward the exits, but neither of them wanted to let go. Neither wanted to step back into the regular world where he was a struggling student, and she was a nurse with secrets, where the magic of twinkling lights and slow songs could not protect them from whatever came next. "This feels like a turning point," Kate thought, like standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. And Daniel was thinking the same thing, feeling the weight of significance in every touch, every shared breath, knowing with absolute certainty that his life had just divided into before Kate and after Kate, and there would be no going back. The black Mercedes sedan pulled up outside the gymnasium just as the final slow song began to play, followed by a second identical vehicle, their polished surfaces gleaming under the parking lot, lights like predators among prey, and students streaming out the doors stopped to stare because cars like that did not belong on this campus. In this neighborhood, and in this world of student loans and part-time jobs, Marcus Webb emerged from the first car, Richard Morgan's personal assistant for 23 years, wearing a suit that cost more than most students' entire semester tuition, and his face carried the grim determination of a man who had been searching for 5 years and finally, had found what he was looking for. He had tracked Katherine through nursing license renewals, a paper trail she had foolishly maintained because even in hiding, she had wanted to practice her profession legally, and the trail had led him here, into this small university town, to this ordinary health clinic, to this gymnasium decorated with streamers and hope, Two security personnel flanked him as they walked toward the entrance, their presence causing a ripple of whispered speculation among the students, and inside the gymnasium the music seemed to fade as heads turned toward the doors, toward the well-dressed strangers who moved through the crowd with the confidence of people accustomed to rooms parting before them. Daniel felt Kate stiffen in his arms before he understood why. Felt her entire body go rigid with a tension that had nothing to do with the dance, and he followed her gaze to see three men in expensive suits scanning the gymnasium with focused intensity. Marcus spotted Katherine across the crowded floor, and his expression shifted from determination to relief, and he began moving toward them with purpose, students stepping aside automatically because men who carried themselves like that expected obstacles to dissolve. Daniel's confusion grew with each step the strangers took, because they were walking directly toward Kate, their eyes locked on her face, and the lead man's expression suggested familiarity, recognition, urgency. "Kate," Daniel said quietly. "Who are they?" But she could not answer, could not speak, could only watch her carefully constructed world crumbling as Marcus Webb closed the distance between her past and her present. "Miss Morgan," Marcus said when he reached them, his voice carrying enough to turn nearby heads, his use of her real name falling like a bomb into the gymnasium's festive atmosphere. "Your father has had a heart attack. He is in Mercy General Hospital asking for you. We need to leave immediately." The words hung in the air, each syllable reshaping reality, and Daniel felt his hand slip from Kate's back as understanding began to dawn. Cold and terrible. "Miss Morgan." The name echoed through the gymnasium like a gunshot, and Daniel felt the world tilt on its axis, because Kate was just Kate, a nurse who lived in a studio apartment and bought her dresses at thrift stores, and Morgan could not possibly be her last name. Except the man in the expensive suit was looking at her with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly who she was. "Katherine Morgan," Marcus continued, his tone gentler now. "I am sorry to interrupt your evening, but this cannot wait. Your father collapsed 3 hours ago. They have stabilized him, but he is asking for you. He needs you." Kate's face had gone pale, all the joy and color draining away as if someone had pulled a plug, and she swayed slightly on her feet, reaching out to steady herself against nothing because Daniel had taken a step back, his hand falling away from hers as understanding crashed through him like waves. "Morgan," Daniel repeated, his voice hollow. As in Richard Morgan, as in Morgan Technologies, as in one of the wealthiest men in America. Kate turned to him with tears streaming down her face, her hand reaching toward him in a gesture that was half explanation and half plea. But he was staring at her like she was a stranger, like the woman he had been dancing with had been replaced by someone else entirely. "Daniel," she said, her voice breaking. "Please let me explain." But Marcus was already moving, his hand gentle but firm on her elbow. "Miss Morgan, we have a helicopter waiting. Every minute counts." Around them, students were whispering, phones emerging from pockets to search Richard Morgan online, to confirm what seemed impossible, that the quiet nurse in the simple dress was the missing heiress whose disappearance had been tabloid fodder 5 years ago. The billionaire's daughter who had vanished without a trace. Daniel watched Kate's face, saw the truth written in her tears, in her silence, in the way she did not deny it, and he felt something precious shattering inside his chest because he had opened himself to her completely, had shown her his poverty and his struggles and his dreams, never knowing she came from a world where his 3 jobs would not pay for a single month's rent in her father's building. "You lied to me," he said quietly, the words barely audible above the music and the whispers, and Kate flinched as if he had struck her. "I have to go," she whispered. "My father," and Marcus was already guiding her toward the exit, his security clearing a path through the stunned crowd, and Kate looked back at Daniel one last time, her face a mask of anguish, before disappearing through the gymnasium doors into a life Daniel could never have imagined, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor, with the corsage wilting on her wrist and his heart breaking in his chest. Marcus guided Kate through the gymnasium doors with the efficiency of someone who had handled countless emergencies, and the cool night air hit her face like a slap, shocking her system, but doing nothing to slow the tears that continued to fall. She pulled against his grip, turning back toward the doors, toward Daniel standing frozen on the dance floor, and she saw his face through the glass, saw the betrayal carved into every feature, the hurt radiating from him like a physical thing, and she wanted to run back, to explain, to make him understand that everything between them had been real even if her name had been a lie. "Miss Morgan, please," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Your father does not have much time." And the words propelled her forward because whatever else she had run from, she could not run from this, could not let her father die, thinking she hated him enough to stay away. The limousine door opened and she slid inside, the leather seats soft and expensive and utterly wrong, after an evening of gymnasium floors and rented suits, and as the car pulled away, she pressed her face against the tinted window, watching the gymnasium recede into the distance, watching Daniel disappear from her life as quickly as he had entered it. Inside the gymnasium, Daniel stood motionless as students surged around him, their whispers building to a roar. Phones out now, articles loading, photographs of Katherine Morgan at charity galas appearing on screen after screen. Comparisons being drawn between the polished heiress in designer gowns and the simple nurse in the sapphire dress. His roommates pushed through the crowd toward him, concern on their faces, but Daniel could not hear their questions, could not process their presence, could only stare at his empty hands and remember the weight of Kate's fingers intertwined with his own. Someone had found the corsage on the floor where it had fallen, the white roses already beginning to brown at the edges, and they handed it to him with the awkward sympathy of someone witnessing a tragedy. Other students stared at him with expressions ranging from pity to cruel amusement. The scholarship kid who had somehow convinced a billionaire's daughter to slum it for an evening, the fool who thought someone like her could actually care about someone like him. Daniel closed his fist around the corsage, feeling the stems dig into his palm, welcoming the pain because it gave him something to focus on besides the humiliation burning through his chest. She had sat across from him at the clinic, had listened to his stories about his mother's sacrifices, had let him buy her dinner at a cheap restaurant, all while sitting on more money than he would earn in 10 lifetimes. He had been so careful, so proud of the modest evening he had planned, never knowing she was probably laughing inside at his pathetic attempts at romance. The gymnasium lights seemed too bright suddenly, the music too loud, and Daniel walked toward the exit with his head down and the corsage clutched in his hand like evidence of his own stupidity. The days that followed blurred together into a gray fog of exhaustion and pain, and Daniel moved through them like a ghost, attending classes without hearing lectures, working his shifts without tasting the food he served, existing in a state of numb detachment that felt safer than the alternative. He replayed every conversation they had shared, searching for clues he had missed, moments where Kate had slipped, where the mask had fallen, and he found them everywhere now that he knew what to look for: the quality of her watch, the way she moved with unconscious grace, the education in her vocabulary that went beyond nursing school. She had been slumming, he told himself. Some rich girl playing at being normal, finding entertainment in the struggling student who worked 3 jobs and thought $15 dresses were beautiful. The humiliation burned hotter than the heartbreak, his pride shredded by the realization that he had poured out his heart to someone who probably saw his poverty as quaint, who had listened to his stories about his mother's sacrifices while wearing a watch that cost more than his mother's funeral. His roommates tried to talk to him, but he shut them down, retreating into his textbooks with the desperate focus of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. And finals became his salvation, problems that had correct answers, equations that did not lie, case studies that demanded his complete attention and left no room for memories of sapphire dresses and genuine smiles. He studied until his eyes burned, until the words on the page blurred together, until exhaustion pulled him under into dreamless sleep where Kate could not find him. But in the quiet moments, in the space between waking and sleeping, he remembered things that did not fit his narrative of betrayal. The tears on her face when Marcus had called her Miss Morgan, and the way she had reached for him as if he was something precious she could not bear to lose. the anguish in her eyes when she had looked back at him through the gymnasium doors. Those tears had been real. Some part of him insisted that pain had been genuine. And late at night, when his defenses were down, he allowed himself to wonder if maybe, possibly, he had misunderstood, if her deception had been about protecting something rather than mocking him. But morning always came with its harsh light and clearer perspective, and he would remember the limousine, the expensive suits, the impossible gulf between a billionaire's daughter and a scholarship student, and he would push the doubt away because believing she had cared about him hurt worse than believing it had all been a lie. The private hospital room looked nothing like the clinic where Kate had spent the last 5 years. All gleaming equipment and hushed efficiency, a space where money ensured privacy and comfort, and the best cardiac specialists in the country. And Kate sat beside her father's bed feeling like an imposter in both worlds, neither the nurse who could help nor the daughter who belonged. Richard Morgan opened his eyes and saw Katherine for the first time in 5 years. And the relief that flooded his face made her chest tighten, because she had convinced herself he would be angry, would demand explanations, would try to control her again, but instead, he just reached for her hand with fingers that trembled from more than physical weakness. "You came," he whispered, his voice rough from intubation. "I was afraid you would not." The doctors said he was stable now, the heart attack serious but survivable, and Kate sat vigil through those first critical hours, holding his hand and feeling the weight of 5 years of silence pressing down on both of them. Their relationship had been strained long before she left. Built on his expectations and her resistance, his certainty that he knew what was best, and her desperate need to make her own choices. And now, in this sterile room, with machines beeping out his heartbeat, they faced each other with the honesty that only near death allows. "I pushed too hard," Richard said during one of his lucid moments. "I wanted to give you everything, and instead, I drove you away. I am sorry, Katherine." Her mother arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained emotion, pulling Kate into an embrace that felt both familiar and foreign. And over the next days, she pleaded with Katherine to stay, to come home, to return to the family and the life she had abandoned. They needed her, her mother insisted. Her father's health required family support, and surely 5 years of playing nurse had been enough. Surely she had proven whatever point she needed to prove. Kate listened and felt claustrophobic, felt the old walls closing in, felt the suffocating weight of expectation settling back onto her shoulders, and she found herself thinking about her studio apartment with its secondhand furniture, about the clinic where students trusted her with their fears, about the simple life she had built where she mattered because of what she did rather than who her father was. And she thought about Daniel, about his face when Marcus had called her Miss Morgan, about the betrayal in his eyes, about the way he had looked at her during the dance like she was something precious, and the loss of that felt more profound than anything her parents' world could offer to replace it. On the 4th day of his recovery, when the color had returned to Richard Morgan's face and the doctor spoke of discharge rather than danger, he asked Kate to sit with him alone, and she pulled her chair close to his bedside with a sense that something important was about to shift between them. "I knew where you were," he said quietly, watching her face for reaction. "Marcus found you within 6 months of your disappearance, tracked you through your nursing license renewal, and every month since then he has sent me reports, photographs of you walking to work, confirmation that you were safe and healthy and apparently happy." Kate felt the words hit her like physical blows. Her carefully guarded secret had never been secret at all. Her father had known and chosen to let her go, and she did not know whether to feel betrayed or grateful. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you not come for me? Why did you let me struggle?" "Because you needed to struggle," Richard said, his voice gentle but firm. "I realized after you left that I had been giving you everything except the thing you needed most, the chance to discover who you were without my shadow covering you. I was wrong, Katherine. Wrong to push my vision of your life onto you. Wrong to assume that my success meant you wanted the same things I wanted." They sat in silence for a long moment, years of misunderstanding beginning to dissolve in the quiet space between hospital machines. "Marcus showed me the photographs from your dance," Richard continued, And I saw something in your face I have not seen since you were a child. Genuine happiness, the kind that comes from being truly seen by someone who matters. That young man, Daniel, he looks at you like you hung the stars just for him." Kate felt tears welling again. The mention of Daniel's name a fresh wound. "He hates me now," she said. "I lied to him about who I was. He thinks I was mocking him, playing some cruel game. Real love is rare, Katherine," Richard said, reaching for her hand. "Rarer than any fortune I have built. Rarer than success or status or any of the things I thought mattered. And when you find it, you fight for it. You do not let pride or fear or the opinions of others steal it from you." He squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "Go back to him. Be honest about everything. Tell him why you hid. Tell him what he meant to you. And then let him choose. Give him the agency to decide if what you shared was worth forgiving the deception. You have my blessing to live whatever life makes you happy, whether that is nursing in a small clinic or running my company or something in between, but do not let my heart attack be the reason you lose your own heart." Kate found Daniel in the library 3 days after her father's condition had stabilized enough for her to leave, found him hunched over textbooks in the same corner where they had once talked about dignity and determination, and when he looked up and saw her standing there, his face went carefully blank. A mask of indifference that could not quite hide the hurt underneath. "I do not want to talk to you," he said, his voice cold. "I have finals to study for." She sat down across from him anyway, uninvited, her hands trembling as she placed them flat on the table between them. "My name is Katherine Elizabeth Morgan," she began, "and 5 years ago I walked away from a penthouse apartment and a trust fund worth more money than you or I could spend in 10 lifetimes because I was suffocating under the weight of being Richard Morgan's daughter." Daniel stared at his textbook, jaw clenched, but he did not leave, did not put in headphones, and Kate took that as permission to continue. "I became a nurse because I wanted to matter for something I did rather than something I inherited," she said. "I chose this town because it was small and anonymous and no one would recognize me. I lived in that studio apartment and bought clothes at thrift stores not as some game but because I wanted to know who I was when stripped of wealth and privilege and expectations." Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward. "I did not tell you because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the truth you would see me differently, treat me differently. And for the first time in my life someone was looking at me and seeing Kate, just Kate, not a fortune or a connection or an opportunity." Daniel's hands had stilled on his textbook, his eyes still fixed downward but his posture shifted, listening despite himself. "You made me feel seen," she whispered. "Really seen. In ways no one ever has. You looked at me in that clinic and saw someone worth caring about. You asked me to a dance knowing I could offer you nothing in return. And that evening with you was the most genuine, most real, most beautiful experience of my entire life." A tear fell onto Daniel's open textbook, spreading across the page. And Kate realized with a start that it was his tear, not hers. "When Marcus called me Miss Morgan, I wanted to die," she continued. "I wanted to explain everything, but my father was dying, and I had to choose, and I chose him, and I have regretted it every moment since because I saw your face, Daniel. I saw how much I hurt you." Kate watched Daniel's face, watched the war between hurt and hope playing out in his expression. And she made herself say the words that terrified her most. "If you want me to leave, I will leave," she said quietly. "I came here to tell you the truth, to apologize for deceiving you, to let you know that everything we shared was real for me, but I understand if that is not enough. I understand if you cannot forgive me." She stood, prepared to walk away, prepared to lose him, because that was what he deserved, the choice she had stolen from him when she hid her identity. Daniel sat frozen, his textbook forgotten, his mind racing through every moment they had shared, every conversation in the clinic, every coffee break, every word exchanged during their perfect evening. He remembered the way she had treated him when he collapsed from exhaustion, the genuine concern in her eyes, the careful way she had listened to his stories about his mother without pity or judgment. He remembered her loneliness, the sadness that sometimes flickered across her face when she thought no one was watching, the way she had talked about finding purpose in service with a conviction that felt too deep to be pretense. He remembered her tears when Marcus had called her Miss Morgan, the way she had reached for him as if he was something precious slipping through her fingers, and those tears had been real. He knew they had been real. "Wait," he said, his voice rough, and Kate froze halfway to standing, her breath caught in her throat. He looked up at her finally, really looked at her, and saw not the billionaire's daughter or the simple nurse but someone caught between two worlds, someone who had been brave enough to step away from everything she knew in search of something authentic. "Who are you really?" he asked, not an accusation but a genuine question. "Are you Katherine Morgan the heiress, or Kate the nurse? Because I need to know who I am choosing, who I am trusting with this." Kate sat back down, her hands shaking, and she met his eyes with an honesty that felt like standing naked in the middle of the library. "I am both," she said. "I am neither. I am someone who was born into wealth but found purpose in service, someone who ran away from privilege but cannot escape where I came from. I am someone who made mistakes and hurt you, and would give anything to take that back." She leaned forward, her voice breaking. "But most of all, Daniel, I am someone who fell in love with a man who saw me as worthy when I was just a nurse in scrubs, who offered me a corsage and his honesty, and an evening that meant more to me than any gala or charity ball ever could. I am not going back to my father's world," Kate continued, her words tumbling out with desperate urgency. "I am going to keep nursing, keep living in my studio apartment, keep being the person I have built myself into over these 5 years. Because that person is real. That life has meaning in ways the penthouse never did." She reached across the table but stopped short of touching him, giving him space to choose. "But I want you in that life, Daniel. If you can forgive me, if you can trust me again, I want to build something real with you, something that has nothing to do with my father's money, and everything to do with two people who saw each other when the rest of the world was looking away." Daniel stared at her outstretched hand, at the vulnerability in her eyes, and something shifted in his chest, a wall crumbling under the weight of a realization he had been too hurt and proud to acknowledge. She could have anyone, he thought. She could have men with trust funds and family estates, men who summered in the Hamptons and knew which fork to use at formal dinners, men who would never show up to a dance in a rented suit with a $15 corsage, but she had said yes to him, had worn a thrift store dress and eaten at a cheap Italian restaurant and danced in a gymnasium like it was the most magical place on earth, and when her identity had been revealed and she could have disappeared back into her privileged world forever, she had come back, had sat across from him in the library, and made herself vulnerable again, despite knowing he might reject her. "I was so angry," Daniel said softly, "because I thought you were laughing at me. Thought my poverty was entertainment for a rich girl playing at being normal. But that is not who you are, is it?" It was not a question. Kate shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "You were never entertainment, Daniel. You were everything. You were the first person who made me feel like being myself was enough, like I did not have to perform or pretend or live up to impossible expectations." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, felt her fingers grip his with desperate strength. "I fell in love with you," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "I fell in love with Kate, the nurse who treated me with kindness when I was just another exhausted student, who talked to me about books and dignity and finding purpose in service. And that person is still you. Whether your last name is Kate or Morgan or anything else, I do not care about your father's money. I do not want your trust fund. I just want you, exactly as you are." 3 months later, Daniel Carter walked across the graduation stage in a cap and gown that represented years of sacrifice and determination. And when he received his diploma and looked out into the audience, he saw Kate in the 3rd row, cheering louder than anyone else, her face radiant with pride. And beside her sat his roommates, who had become like brothers. And beside them, in a simple suit rather than the expensive ones his assistants usually chose, sat Richard Morgan, his hands clapping with genuine respect for the young man who had earned everything he had. After the ceremony, Richard shook Daniel's hand and looked him in the eye and said, My daughter tells me you want to start a nonprofit for first-generation college students. I would like to hear more about that, not as an investor but as someone who admires what you have accomplished. Daniel started his career with a job at a local business consulting firm, modest pay but meaningful work, and Kate continued at the university health clinic, treating students with the same gentle care that had first drawn Daniel to her. They built a life together on their own terms, splitting time between Kate's studio apartment and Daniel's new place across town, cooking cheap meals and talking late into the night about dreams and plans and the future they were creating together. Kate's mother slowly accepted that her daughter had chosen a different path, and family dinners became less strained, more genuine, built on acceptance rather than expectation. On the wall of their living room hung a single photograph, the image from the senior dance, Daniel and Kate caught in that perfect moment of connection, his hand on her back, her smile unguarded, two people who had found each other across impossible divides and chosen love over fear, authenticity over pretense, truth over protection. And so their story teaches us something profound about the nature of true wealth. Katherine Morgan had everything money could buy, but nothing that mattered until she stripped away the privilege and discovered who she was beneath the fortune. Daniel Carter had nothing but earned everything through the wealth of character, integrity, and genuine human connection. In a world that measures value in dollars and status, they remind us that the richest life is built not on what we inherit, but on who we choose to become. Not on what we possess, but on how we love. Real courage is not protecting your heart, but opening it. Not hiding who you are, but revealing yourself completely. Trusting that the right person will see your truth and choose you anyway. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that authenticity matters more than appearance, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the human heart in all its vulnerable, courageous, beautiful complexity. Because in the end, we are all searching for the same thing. Someone who sees us, really sees us, and loves us not despite our truth but because of it.